hosting the lecture and joins us now. Garinda, this is fascinating. We've been talking about this off air. This is absolutely fascinating, particularly because this action, if you like, was between, not the British government strictly, but between the East India Company. But it was between two groups of soldiers with a deep militaristic view of the world, great pride. There was a lot to lose in this, wasn't there?
100%, Ben. Thank you very much for having me on the show as well. Essentially, what we had was the Sikh Empire, basically, which was actually at a stage where it had been fragmented. We had just lost the actual Maharaja Ranjit Singh in 1839, so the Punjab was actually turning in on itself between the actual Lahore Darbar or court and the actual army. So there was a bit of tension amongst the Sikhs themselves and the actual court itself, but on the other side, a treaty had already been put in place which separated British and Sikh territories. So when we got to 1846, a number of incidents took place which kind of led to the first battle, which was the Battle of Mudki, which started a couple of days before the Battle of Ferozeshah. But you're quite right, it was two military groups actually going head to head in like the Punjab, and which was the last kind of state to actually fall to the British before the annexation, essentially.
And the Battle of Ferozeshah, tell us a little bit about it.
Okay, so essentially the battle prior to it was the Battle of Mudki, which had fought a couple of days before. So there was kind of like a lull, and then essentially what we have now is that the Sikh forces actually get to this area called Ferozeshah, which is not too far from a place where most Indians and Sikhs probably refer to as Ludhiana. So essentially the British forces are there, the Sikh forces are there, and then all of a sudden there's a bit of a regrouping by all sides in a sense. But essentially what takes place is that the Sikhs are actually let down by their own commanders, because two of them are actually in collusion with the British. So state secrets and military battle plans have already been provided to the British. So in a sense, when the battle starts to take place, one of the commanders just doesn't take part at all. So he withdraws the forces. So it essentially leads the Sikhs to like a trap in a sense. But at the same time, the British as well actually get confused as well, and there's a lot of friendly fire which takes place as well. So it's like it is a bit of a confusing battle, but essentially after the first night, that is when you actually see what the British commanders are actually saying. So Lord Gough, for instance, who's the person in charge, commander-in-chief, he's actually joined by the Governor-General, essentially. So there's a tension between them as well. So the politics are at play in terms of ensuring who's in command and who's actually making the orders on the battlefield. Because
that's the intriguing thing, is it is worth making that point again. It was the British East India Company, their soldiers, and that, in a sense, they were a proxy for the British government, weren't they?
That's correct, yeah. And so essentially, they're actually fighting this war out there. And eventually, what would take place is after a couple of these battles, British Parliament would actually kind of admonish Lord Gough, even though Lord Gough did win eventually, but the number of casualties that took place in these wars was phenomenal.
What sort of figures are we talking?
It's hard to actually say in terms of numbers. I mean, there is British sources and there's Sikh sources which give the figures, but in terms of British military, in terms of when they talk about losses, they do actually consider these battles as being some of the worst they've ever fought in terms of losses, because you've actually got commanders of units which fell literally in a couple of these battles straight away.
Because the British Army at the time worked, and correct me if I'm wrong, worked on a sort of a principle of absolute primacy in every battle it took part in. You think, 40 odd years, 45 years on from that, you're talking about the Boer War and all that kind of thing. This was a period of time when the British Army could still lay claim to that, but things like the Battle of Ferozeshah started to point out that actually there were tactical issues, there was a lack of command, there was a political interference that started to eat away at that extraordinary strength that the British Army did have at that time.
Absolutely, and some of these generals had actually fought in the Battle of Waterloo, for instance. So these are not like these secondary or third-rate generals. Yeah. These are actually people who have actually, five-star generals in a sense, and they're actually fighting a weakened Sikh state, actually, because some of the key generals of the Sikhs had already died by that time. So essentially, with duplicity on the part of some of the Sikh commanders, we get to the second day of the Battle of Ferozeshah, or the night after the first first stage of fighting. And at this stage, Lord Gough and the Governor General are thinking of quitting at this particular point. They've started to burn, they've given orders to burn the state papers.
That's extraordinary. So look, we could talk about this for ages. I find it absolutely just fascinating. But well, I don't want to give it all away. I mean, I know that people go to look at their history books and stuff because you've got this special event on.
That's correct. So tonight at the Newark Houses Museum, which is opposite De Montfort University, we've got a special lecture today by guest speaker Amarpal Singh Sidhu, who's actually written 2 books on the Anglo Sikh Wars, and he's going to be doing a lecture and talking about this particular battle, and it fits in with our organisation, the Sikh Museum Initiative, in terms of our larger project which we're doing here in Leicester called the Anglo Sikh Wars, Battles, Treaties and Relics. And essentially at the same museum in between March and June next year, we'll be holding an exhibition related to relics from the British and the Sikh side.
Fascinating stuff. I can't wait to see it, actually. I think it's going to be absolutely fascinating. It's a period of time where you know, I mean, within half a century, battle had changed immeasurably, hadn't it?
Of course.
Fascinating.